Okay, Cathy Downer, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Well, let's start with I asked this to Phil a couple of weeks ago just to get a temperature of the situation because when you're sitting in the press box on the other side of the room, you start getting ideas. But just how is it feeling on council these days? Just like in sort of like personality wise and everybody's temperament. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, I'm of two minds about this sort of this council. Like, I think it's a council that gets along fairly well, and we're not seeing a lot of, as Cam would say, the gotcha type things. Like, we're not seeing a lot of that, and people are moving on pretty quick from losses. On the other hand, I don't see it as cohesive because of the hybrid meeting style. And I know some need to be at home.
Mm,
But it's sort of, those informal conversations in the hallway type thing, right? That happen, or you don't have that same interaction or get to know your colleagues. It might take a little more work, certainly. Doing that. So I'm sort of, from a personality perspective, that's sort of how I'm feeling, that there's that a little disconnected from some of my colleagues. I feel it's the first term that I've sort of felt somewhat discouraged, and it sort of happened shortly after the election, where the province started taking over stuff.
mm,
And there's a sense of um, so we can't do a lot around planning anymore, and we're being sort of targeted as the reason, by other levels of government, as the reason why houses aren't being built. And sort of, it's sort of, so that's all been quite, I find, quite discouraging. And then there's more news out this week, and then earlier in the term, the backtracking to the province was backtracking on everything. The heights, and then the green belt, and then like all kinds of things got backtracked. So, it's just I'm finding it a little more discouraging this term. And then, the budget is the mayor's, and that actually worked out fairly well this last time. I was okay with it, though we had to defer a lot of work. But I thought the process went better. I was happy that the mayor did the town halls and we were
mm,
there.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jumping off of what you just said a second ago about not kind of feeling like you're in control. Um, I mean, there was an announcement this week, more changes. They're taking away more the province. I mean, taking away more plans, probably deferring more fees. On top of that, there's this pull from the other end, which is from the people who are actually building the houses, the developers. Um, they have certain desires. They know that the province is certainly malleable. They know that I think some members of council, including the mayor, are probably malleable. That if you say X, Y, Z get in the way of building X number of houses, that's a pressure point that they can manipulate. So just as one councillor amongst, I guess presently 11 plus the mayor, what kind of pressure does that put on you when you're thinking about how to vote or how to proceed on these planning matters that just, it feels like there's no right answer anymore.
Well, it's the individual planning matters aren't, like, if, like last night, and they're not too bothersome for me. It's the more around the policy we're having to develop, and the pressure to create things, like thinking that fourplexes are going to be a panacea. Like, they're not,
Mm,
right? They're not getting built. And I'm just, in the last couple of months, feeling somewhat resentful around, you can call it pressure around policy, but to change this, to change that, to allow this, to like discount this, discount that, and they're still not building. So we're still, with the same 6,000 approved units, and nobody's building. And it doesn't matter what we do. And Leanne and I talked to a developer a couple of years ago. We said, well, what if all the taxes were off the table? Would you reduce the prices? And they said, no, it would go for market. And I heard Gregor Robertson say something similar in an interview yesterday that they're going to charge market no matter what. So how do you get to really affordable and deeply affordable housing, which is what we need? There's right now is around the supply. Like I'm just not buying that developers will build if we do this, this, and this. That's not going to happen because the climate's not right for the interest rates, the workforce, the tariff issues. That's not all working. So I'm just not, I'm out of that argument now. They're not
Right.
going to build. So why continue to reduce this, reduce that, make this faster, cut out the public here, all of that, when it's not, they're not going to build. And it just feels like we're setting ourselves up for a problem down the road when they do build. And
Right.
it's going to be on the backs of taxpayers around infrastructure and all those things because of all the work we've done, or hiring more staff to meet the deadlines that we have to meet. So I'm more sort of concerned about all of that, and that that's not working, that we need to and like I said, around supply, well, my husband's in real estate. They've got a record number of listings right now in Guelph, over 500. Like, they're not moving. So it's not that, right? So we could do all kinds of things and they're not going to build. And so it's not, to me, it's the deeply affordable stuff that we should be focusing on, getting back into social housing and rent geared to income housing and really affordable housing, like for seniors that, at a, like the apartment buildings they have at St. Joseph's, right? That if
Right.
you're under
Right.
a certain income, then this is rent. So that's where I think we need to put our focus on instead of focusing more on the supply issue. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I think I'm beginning to think we're heading down the wrong road. Not
Yeah.
beginning. I've been thinking it for a few months now.
Well, no, it's interesting because there are two houses for sale on my street, and I live on a pretty small street, so that feels a bit weird. Here we are in a housing crisis, and they've both been on the market for about a week, and I remember a time like walking past a for sale sign in my old neighborhood one day, and then it says sold the next day.
Oh yeah. No, it takes a long time to sell a house now, and nothing's moving. It's just not moving. Maybe something around 600 to 700 may move. I mean, prices are coming down a bit, which is positive, and rents are coming down, and that's positive, but not significantly for a lot of people to be able to afford. And particularly if people are feeling uncertain around the economy, like, you
Right.
know, yeah.
Keeping all that in mind, and maybe you've kind of already answered this in a sense, but since it's your ward, I wanted to put this on the table. This community improvement plan that was recently approved for the Scottsdale Edinburgh area. So essentially the neighborhoods around Stone Road Mall. Um, I think I understood it. It's like we're combining certain processes so that it's like you go into City Hall once instead of, and as long as you're checking all the boxes, you don't necessarily have to go to council. My question um, is in so much as like we don't like red tape and we want things to go fast and we want things to be approved fast and we don't want to be buckled down in procedures and regulations and things. But it's not are not things like this like kind of leading to a situation where I think you kind of inferred where the economic clouds clear and then maybe you have like a section of Scottsdale where you have like five big projects all going at once. And
Yeah.
that and I'm wondering too, because I think that plan passed without a lot of community, like people didn't, I don't think anyone came to really delegate to those meetings when those plans were discussed either. So
It's it's largely a commercial area, right?
yeah.
So, and except maybe the Jane Field and Scottsdale area, but you couldn't really do a lot of infill in there.
Hmm.
But there's the university lands, there. So no, not a lot of people came, and that's what I mean is what you said. When the clouds clear, like, so 45 days to approval if everything like is okay and checks off, if they're within that, they're not asking for a lot of variances like we saw last night. it's gonna expand our planning department significantly if that happens, and it's already having trouble finding planners, right? So what happens when, as you say, those clouds clear and we've got all these incentives, we've cut this, cut that, and we've got these community improvement areas, um, and 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 then there's limited engagement, well, none public engagement. And in an area like that, that might be okay. But the next one coming later this year is the downtown secondary plan, which is also
Hmm.
going to be a community improvement plan. And I think that one is going to be more difficult to get through, because I think, well, you've got the Heritage District coming in too, but there's going to be some pushback, I think, from, about what we do down there and how we allow for certain things. And there's bonusing for in it as well. Like if you do affordable housing, you get more height, and if you donate this or public art, you get this and this. So that's, and I think that's left up to staff to decide. I don't think it'll come to council either, which, may
Right.
be concerning. But I think the downtown one is going to be a little more difficult to get through. And I still think, and I raised it at the Heights study meeting, that the area in the downtown between the tracks of Wellington is just ripe for redevelopment. And from Gordon over to, where Wellington goes around, right? That whole area in where, I don't know if you know where, Sugo's is in that area there.
Sure.
And, and where the parking lot is, and we could create if we did an actual precinct plan for that, right? And then I could see doing that, right? Okay,
Mm.
we've got enough policies in place to make this something, right? And another part of the downtown that we can integrate with the existing downtown, but also makes it a nice area on its own. Um,
Mm.
so that's sort of like, there's opportunities, but I just worry about how we're doing it and whether we're giving away too much. So when the clouds clear, as you say, are we going to get like ad hoc development in the downtown in
Right.
that
Well, I mean, speaking of giving away too much, I did kind of want to put this on our agenda because, I mean, it's still a matter that has to come before tribunal. So I don't want you to like presuppose a decision that you will have to help make. But I mean, this situation at the Alma
area?
on Scottsdale and Stone, the expansion of the student residence there, the developer feels like they shouldn't have to pay student fees because it's university property, a project that's explicitly for a university clientele. Uh, but that's it's not exactly clear, and I'm curious. What are your considerations going into this? Because this is going to be, I think, a precedent-setting move. And are you concerned? And maybe this is something that's already been previsioned at City Council. But do you have like the clarity from the regulations to make that decision?
Well, it is a concern because it could be precedent setting, especially particularly when you do it along with that community improvement plan, right?
Mm,
So because a lot of the land within the community improvement land is owned by the university.
that's right.
So I mean, if you look at Chancellor's Way too, I mean, that's all student housing.
Hmm.
Um, so there does seem to be this fine line between use and occupy, right? So one's arguing at the use and occupy for students, and our staff are saying no, it's for the use and occupying for the developers who are gonna and then may have a windfall from this. That's the argument, and that it doesn't really align with what the university wants, which is affordable, inclusive housing, which is what they're aiming for. It's very high rents, quite exclusive actually.
Mm,
Um, and so I don't know how it's going to go, and I wasn't going to be at the first meeting we did that, so I hadn't really read much of it, but so I've now gone through some of it, but I need to go through more of the material. There's like 400 pages. But I do think I do understand staff's concern. This idea of use and occupy, how we define that and um, that it's not for the university's not running it. They're not
Mm.
the landlords. They have no say in who goes there or how the rents are or anything like that. So I think will be interesting to see the discussion tomorrow night and how that goes. But I can see why it's a real concern because there's a lot of land that the university owns in that area. And I mean, it could start out that way, right, as student rental, but there's no saying it can't change at some time down the road.
But I mean, this is another example of I think council getting stuck between a rock and a hard place. And
Yeah.
like either way, you're going to get blamed because you're going to lose the development fees, which you'll be blamed for, putting that up out in the back of the taxpayer, or you're going to be blamed for not being pro student housing enough. And I think because I talked to the president of the U of G's real estate students real estate association, and I mean he's very understanding, but on the other hand, he's like, we're students and we need places to live that are like even just available, regardless of price point. It's an availability issue in so much as it's a price issue.
Yeah. And again, like nobody's building on, the old Best Western site yet. So, you know,
Yeah.
and it looks like though that the university is going to have shovels in the ground pretty quickly on what they plan to do off college there. So that'll be
Okay.
good.
Well, that is good to hear. I before we run out of time, I want to get into some climate action stuff. And I think you know where I'm going with this, but at the meeting, committee of the whole last week, we heard 30% of emissions come from transportation. Most of Guelph's transportation emissions are private automobiles. There was an hour-long discussion, and Mr. Hoyan mentioned that, and I hadn't heard this figure before, the 100,000 vehicle registries in Guelph. Um, can council have a sensible discussion about climate action or have a sensible climate action plan without talking about addressing how nobody who has an opportunity to use a private automobile will take transit? Sorry for the gotcha question.
No, it's not. It's something that I need a bit of more thoughtfulness on, but I think I think it needs a serious discussion. Cars are expensive, right? When you look at the infrastructure and when you just see the work that's being done right now, it's expensive. And so, 100,000 cars registered means, a lot of infrastructure has to be built and to ensure those cars get around the city, are able to get around the city. And how do we enhance our transit system to be more effective for people to want to use? And that's it. You have to want to use it, and you're a transit user. Um, and it is like that frequency. I think that's really important. And I think the Gordon Street line is a good example of what's good, and more of those around the city, like Edinburgh, could certainly use that.
Hmm.
Uh, because that's a straight line, and that would take a lot of cars off Edinburgh, which is a busy road. And I think if we, I'm always the one that doesn't like to cut transit at budget time. I'm always sort of It's always been a problem for me. But I think
And I
when we do,
appreciate that.
okay, I think when we do, it's like I think when we do the next update, we really need to have that discussion. How do you make it more attractive for people to use? And I remember Bob Race talking about this once about trains going into Toronto, and you have to make people want to use it. You can't have them dirty and like you know what I mean.
Mm, right.
It's in our case, it's not that they're dirty. We need to have them more frequent and more available, more accessible for people to use.
No, but I mean to that point, the Gordon, Norfolk, Woolwich corridor, the nine that is like well used.
Yeah.
Summer, spring, fall, winter, no
So
matter.
why
Yeah,
so why wouldn't we replicate that?
right.
that's sort of what I'd like to see more of on those main routes, is to replicate that frequency for people. And I think that would make a difference. I mean, I can go out to Gordon and my nephew is living with us as a student. He can, walk 2 minutes to Gordon and he can count on a bus coming like all the time, right? And he
Yeah.
had an app that showed him. So, to get up to the university. And or for me to go downtown, like you can rely upon that, right? But if I lived over near Edinburgh Road, that would be a much different story,
Yes.
right? So I think, those types of frequencies on Stone, on like Edinburgh and up on Victoria, those types of things would make a big difference, and something we should look to do. Um, it's hard, and I understand, Cam, in some ways. Oh, free this for seniors 1 day a week. But I don't get that. I don't believe that's going to make a difference for kids. I think the money should be going into investing in the actual the routes themselves.
Well,
Yeah.
I think I said this to Cam. Um, when you, Mayor Guthrie, to be formal, when if you live on a bus route and you take transit, I mean, I knew this when I lived in the West End. You don't get the bus like around 9 o'clock in the morning or 3 p.m. in the afternoon because you go past GCVI where like 100 kids get on, and there's 100 kids waiting on the curb for the next one.
Yeah.
So like kids have the like if you're trying to build like um transit use amongst young people, they're there. I said the problem is when they are 16 and they can get a car and when they realize I could drive somewhere in 10 minutes instead of waiting for the bus and then taking 50 minutes to get to where I want to go. That's the delta.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we as a society, as parents, we don't encourage that as much anymore. Like my kids, they had when they went to high school, they took the city buses to high school, and it got them used to being on transit. So it became, and maybe that's where Cam's going with this too. We'll get them used to being a transit user young, and they're not worried about using it
Mm,
later or something, right? So
maybe.
there may be, like, it is my, like I said, my nephew here, he that's how he got to high school in Hamilton, was, getting on the bus and spending, half an hour getting to high school. And now when he's here, he's quite happy to take the bus all over the city. So maybe there is something to that as well. But yeah.
Well, in our last minute or so, I'm kind of taking an informal census, but there is an open seat on city council.
Oh
There are
yeah.
3 ways to fill it. How would you like to see Ward 6 get represented till the end of the term?
I think we need to appoint somebody. I just think if it was early in the term, I'd say by election, but I think we need to appoint somebody. And I don't know how, I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked into it enough how that process would play out, but I think we need to appoint, and I think that person should be from Ward 6. I mean, others have floated other people, make people in other wards, but no, I think it should be a Ward 6 councillor. I mean, they should have representation. Are you living in
Um,
Ward 6 now, Adam?
I do technically live in Ward 6. I
There
wish
you
people would stop recruiting me. Um,
go.
I have a job to do, and we've done it today. So, Kathy Downer, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion.